Hey,
Okay, so I first met Cheryl when she offered a writing course through the library. I don't even remember how many years ago now.
Close to
And
10.
when was it?
Close to 10.
Yeah. So when that course was over, she volunteered to keep it going if anyone wanted to keep going. So there was a group of us that did. And then she offered again. So a group of about 5 or 6 of us have continued on. And one of the things that gives Sheryl her credibility, I guess, is her service as the state poet laureate. And she's had a couple of works published, a couple of collections that are published. But her true passion and her real heart is in getting younger children to get involved with writing, especially poetry. And so she started the Missoula Writing Collaborative. And that's what I wanted her to let you know about, to know what's going on with that in the schools and her role in that. So Sheryl, that's it. That's it.
Thank you, darling. So I will begin. When I was very young, I was in the worst possible situation with my family. There was alcoholism, beatings, and abuse. And I never told anyone because the uncle threatened me with life in prison with him in the cell. Well, when I was in about 4th or 5th grade, I started writing stories. And my teacher, Ms. Alice Scottin in Minneapolis, Minnesota, told me I was going to write books and get them published and travel the world. Well, no one had ever even suggested to me that I could write my own beautiful script. My parents, they didn't think that I would want to go to college, so they didn't save anything. And their main aim was that I didn't have a baby before I was 16, which I didn't. So I started writing. And when I was 17, I got my first poem published in a book. And then I got more poems published, and then I started winning prizes. And now this is from a child who wet the bed until she was 14, bit my nails. I had a twitch and a tick, and I was a wreck. But I found myself as an author. And so things went really, really well for me. I was in the right place at the right time, and I just kept getting published and kept winning awards. And that built up for me what I had lost throughout my childhood, the deprivation of information and reading, and the fear and the stress and the constant hypervigilance about where the next punch was coming from. And so being a poet changed my world in ways I never could have imagined. One of the things it did was it made me déclassé, which means my family would have been lower middle class, lower class, but as an artist, you are not judged class-wise. So an artist can travel with paupers and kings because they're not restricted to being middle class or lower class. So I discovered this great freedom. And when I was in my 20s, I'd been published 5 or 6 times, and I had a book out, and I moved to New York City. And in New York, I worked at Teachers and Writers Collaborative, and they put me in Harlem and in South Bronx and in Bed-Stuy, toughest neighborhoods in America. But I found that the kids were always the same: loving, innocent, beautiful, and sold. And so I realized that this work was my life's mission, was to pass on to children what that teacher gave me: the right to be whatever you can be, whether it's a writer or a football player, but just that you can do your dreams. If you can see it, you can be it. That's what I tell the third grade. So I came to Montana from New York because I was actually just wiped out from living. I was poor, so I lived in these terrible neighborhoods. I was held up at knife point twice. And I got a chance to come to Missoula just for 3 months to teach. But when I got here, I met my husband. And I knew he was my husband the minute I met him. I told him, I remember you. And he didn't know what I was talking about, but it's been 35 years. So I did remember him from somewhere. And I didn't want to wait on tables. I wanted to do my life's work. So I founded the Missoula Writing Collaborative in 1994. We had 5 schools. I taught the writers this beautiful hologram. Each person goes in with their own personality and equipment, but they follow a model, which is 15 minutes of encouragement, exposure to literature. And I don't teach Shel Silverstein. I teach T.S. Eliot. I teach the greats, and the children rise to my aspirations, understand and love the poems, and then write poems in return that are so remarkable. So now the Missoula Writing Collaborative is 26 years old, and we're in 31 schools in Western Montana, and we cover thousands of children. We've been to Hawaii and to an island off Alaska, Heidelberg, and we have expanded, but we're based in Western Montana. So we give the children the first third to get excited, to read them poems. For example, there's a poem by D.H. Lawrence, and it says, "The youth walks up to the horse to put its halter on, and the horse looks at him in silence." I read that to 3rd and 4th graders, and they immediately have stories about their rat, gerbil, hamster, dog, cat, whatever they have. They write about their love of it, the fact that the rat sleeps with them, and the fact, the dog that died that they still mourn and write beautiful poems for. And I feel like I've touched this untapped spring of miraculous genius. And I think it gets interrupted so that by 6th or 7th grade, they've withdrawn from wanting to express what's inside of them. They instead want to fit in. The second part of the hour is for them to write silently. And I come around desk to desk and I look at their work and I'll read out loud something that I think is really wonderful. And I don't care about spelling, neatness, punctuation, or grammar, because what I want is just the pure drive and brilliance from these kids without censoring themselves or editing themselves, because I found as a writer that my number one problem is that I edit myself. I've got somebody standing over my shoulder here going, well, that sure sounds stupid. So I'm sure that children do the same. And so I encourage them to shut off the editor, not to listen to any negativity, but to express freely what's in their soul. The third part of the hour, each child comes up to the front of the classroom and takes my chair, which is the author's chair, and they read their work aloud. And then here's where the community part comes in. The other kids cheer and clap and tell us what they liked best in the poem. And I'm telling you, kids that are not succeeding at the regular curriculum, kids that are on the edge, kids that consider themselves losers, they find a place for themselves. The other kids cheer and applaud. And sometimes if they're not quite brave enough to read their work out loud, I will read it anonymously. And then the class goes, who wrote that? Who wrote that? And the child who wrote it will blush and put a book on their head. They don't want to say, well, I did, but they let us know that they did. And it gives them this sense of self-esteem and security that they can express their deepest feelings and not get punished. We do not grade or mark. What we do is when they've written, we take the poems home and then we make notes on them about what the kids are doing right. Success is addictive. Once you've had someone write on your paper, this is so excellent, these verbs pop off the page like popcorn, you want more of that. And so the kids that can't win in other places, they can win in creative writing and in poetry. They can surprise you. They don't use cliches like adults. Everything that they say, they've invented. And by midway through the 12-week residency, they're all reading. They're all lining up to read. They're all making wise comments on each other's work. And while this is all going on, each one has a writing portfolio or a manila folder. And on the inside, they wrote vocabulary. And so I teach them, excuse me, alliteration, onomatopoeia, similes, metaphors. And I give them a toolbox of vocabulary, but I let them say what they feel. And then I write positive comments on their work and return it to them. And by the end of the residency or the time I spend in the classroom with them, they each have 12 to 14 poems that they get to take home and show their parents and grandparents how amazing they are. I also type up all their poems and put together an anthology of their work. This one says poetry, 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 poetry. And I have them do the illustrations inside. There's a flying cat there. And when they see their scribbled pencil in text, typed, collected text in a form that they can carry with them, well, they beam and they keep them for years. I'll go back from 3rd grade to 4th grade to 5th grade, and they've still got them. They're carrying them around. They've had them signed like yearbooks, but they have this object now with their text in it. We also have a reading at the end of my session where parents and family are invited, and the kids get up, usually in the gym with a microphone, and they perform their work. And I'd like to stop here and ask any of you if I could get you to perform your work, read your poem to a crowd. The number one thing American adults are afraid of is speaking before a crowd. So I tell the kids, you get up here and read your work out loud, and you are braver than most of the grown-ups that you know. And so I encourage them to speak their truth. There's a real relationship that happens with the kids besides the writing. It's setting up a trust and a belief that your voice does matter and what you have to say does matter. I grew up under the dictum, children should be seen and not heard. And I tell them, you must be heard to be seen. And they respond so beautifully. And I do think it's because we've connected and they trust me and they know there's no humiliation, no test, no grade, that this is free for them and they're free to take part. And I tell them weird is good. And I also ask them questions like, how many of you feel like you don't belong? Or maybe you're not good enough. And I raise my hand, and slowly every hand in the classroom goes up. And I tell them, you see, we all feel like that. We're in the same boat. We all feel like we're just not as good as the rest. And you can't compare your insides with someone else's outsides. And so I work on developing their trust and love and psyche and connection. And I asked them to comment on each other's poems. And so there's this writing community that develops, and they cheer each other on. And if someone has a grandparent that dies and writes a poem and weeps, the other kids come up and embrace them and say, "You got this. You're gonna be okay. I know how you feel." So these beautiful relationships are made. And I really feel that you cannot be in a writing group with people without eventually loving them, because you are telling each other your truths. Out in the day-to-day world, nobody says, "What is your strongest memory of your father? What does the smell of lilacs make you remember?" No one asks, "What dream do you have again and again? What are you afraid of?" When I do adult writing groups for PTA to show them what their kids are getting, they weep when they read their poems, because this has been inside them for so long and they haven't had a chance to express it. So the children who learn to express it and be brave and get up and read their work, they've got something inside of them now that is going to prepare them to speak up in their life, to stand up for themselves and each other. We do a lot of writing about bullying, about taking someone's light away. And we develop these wonderful relationships, and we learn the best ways that people interact with each other. You know, the only rules I have is you can't say anything mean about someone in your poem. That's basically about it. And children know so much more than they let on, or that we know or can tell. And we develop this mesh of relationship through language and sharing and connection that is unbreakable. The Writing Collaborative now is 26 years old. So I have children that I taught at Prescott School in 3rd grade that come back to me and talk to me about how much it meant to them. I've remained connected to dozens, if not hundreds, of children whom their eyes lit up and they got it, like little lions or lanterns. They got it. What I think and feel matters, and I can express it, and others will be supportive of me. And for a society and for a civilization, that's essential. We have to be able to communicate and connect, or we're lost, as is clearly obvious. And I think that when children take part in the poetry writing together, it builds good citizens. It builds brave people, honest people. And, you know, a lot of times the 3rd grade boys will want to write about the toilet and wedgies and, 3rd grade boy stuff. And I don't tell them they can't, but I tell them that's old and you're new and you can do better. And they used to want to write about horror movies and like Halloween and Freddy Krueger and all that garbage. And again, I say what's in your head is so much better than what is on that screen. And when we have the reading and the parents come, I tell them, thank you for listening to your children's ideas rather than watching TV, the great poisoner of minds. And they are very happy with what their children do. I speak some Greek, and I sign, I interpret for sign language. And so I teach them during our class every morning to count in Greek and sign language. Ena, dio, tria, tessera, pende, exieptacto, nea, deca. And so they can count to 1,000 in Greek and sign language. And when we have our reading, I'll say, how many of you 4th graders can count to 25 in Greek and accompany yourself in American Sign Language? And they stand up and they do it. And, you know, kids don't go home and tell their parents what happened in school. So their parents are amazed that they have this ability. But, you know, at that age, their minds can absorb more than I could ever provide for them. So I think that when children use sign and Greek and creative writing, their brains get a little more fulfilled and connected. The corpus callosum is this nerve that divides the right and left brain. Well, children who learn sign language, it changes from a movement to language, and it connects both sides of the brain so that later in life, they're more able to learn languages, music, chess, all of those systems, because they've had this integration happen at such a young age. And they are boundlessly spiritual and intelligent and good.